So for any of the newcomers here, it's my kind of practice to take a theme for every month, and then for the first 2 Sundays to develop the theme, and then on the 3rd Sunday to recap the first 2 and then open up to a Q&A. And so for the month of July, I want to look at the notion of healing the family tree. So this was an essay I wrote just on June 15th, a few days ago, around this topic, and I'll expand on that much more in the homily and in next week's homily with God's help. I called it Ripple Me This. I've long been fascinated by near-death experience research. The Division of Perceptual Studies at the University of Virginia and the International Association of Near-Death Studies have made a science of studying this phenomenon. And the aspect of the NDE that most fascinates me is the life review, in which the temporarily dead subject, with the aid of a disincarnate guide, is shown in an encyclopedic, audiovisual, 360-degree wraparound Dolby sound movie of the entire life just ended. And the most fascinating aspect of that review, apart from the fact that there is zero judgment from the guide, is that the deceased gets to experience each event from the perspective of each person who was directly involved in the event. And not just the idea, I wonder what Johnny felt like when I said that to him, but rather I temporarily become Johnny and feel intensely what the effects were. It gets even more fascinating, however. The viewer gets to understand and experience the ripple effect as it spreads out to all the people and creatures who will be affected by Johnny's subsequent behavior, as it was influenced by my interactions with him. In fact, those ripples, however faint, will affect the very cosmos and all its denizens. In truth, every single act creates a separate timeline, spinning off a parallel reality that involves not just all sentient beings, but everything that depends on energy for its very existence and self-propagation, which in fact means everything. And by acts, I also mean thoughts and words, since these also are energy forms. History, as we experience it, is simply the trajectory of a particular timeline created by the cumulative sum of all the choices made by all of the players. I want, however, to take a still deeper dive into this phenomenon. Imagine you could ask your guide to tweak the act in question, and then see what kind of a timeline it would spin off with all of the corollary effects on the cosmos and its inhabitants. No matter how many ways you divide up infinity, each section will still be infinite. So you could retweak any of these spun-off timelines and watch the resulting scenarios evolve. Then you could grade them on a scale of really bad to really good. Perhaps then you could choose a new incarnation, parachuting into that new lifetime in order to take the new, better, more life-affirming and love-promoting action. Since I do not believe in a linear one incarnation at a time in strict chronological sequence, I foresee the parallel processing and mutual interactive learning that would result from the blending of these lifetimes. Pareidolia, allegedly, is the mistake of inferring meaningful patterns from utterly random data. For example, seeing an elephant in a cloud formation. But I believe that pareidolia is in fact the ability to call into a level of reality any object through attention and intention. It is the quantum mechanics double-slit experiment writ large. I believe that the ultimate reality is an infinite matrix of pixels, which can be either turned on or off, thus creating a universal language capable of bringing to the sensorium any image from its potential state to its actualized state. This is the language of Boolean algebra, binary mathematics. And at a simple level, it's what makes video and audio possible on your TV or computer screen. The combination then of these new forms of NDE, life review, And the creative power of pareidolia can, I believe, bring about not only healing and growth for the individual soul, but for the family tree. And by family tree, I don't just mean an individual's genetic lineage, but the tree of the family of all sentient beings. Imagine a cup of tepid tea, abandoned and forgotten for 10 minutes on the countertop as you went about the tasks of the day. Then you remember it, and you simply add boiling water. This addition does not dump the languishing languid molecules, but it adds new hot ones, so that the entire beverage has a new, much more pleasant taste. In the same way, I believe it is possible to heal the family tree, not by unhappening a previous lifetime lineage, but by adding a new one. The blend is an improvement that didn't need to pretend that the previous history never occurred. Is this the meaning of the life of Jesus? That he came to spin off a new timeline which upgraded other timelines both retroactively and proactively? Each of us is a butterfly in Brazil flapping its colorful, delicate wings and thus helping to create the weather patterns in California. Each of us, as we dip our oars into the ocean of incarnation, is creating ripples. You are helping to spin off a new timeline in which all creatures swim. Be mindful. These are words inspired by God. So if I were to give this series of homilies for July a title, a working title, I might call it Healing the Past and Healing the Future. And that's where I'm going to take us for the next 3 Sundays, God willing. So I was born and raised in Cork City in Ireland. And the patron saint of Cork City is Saint Finbar. He lived in the 6th century. So this city is called, dedicated to him. But there's an old hospital in Cork City called Saint Finbar's Hospital. And this hospital provided many of the important people in my life. In the 1940s and 1950s, my paternal grandfather, whom I called Daddy, Big Daddy, and with whom I lived for the first 6 years of my life, he worked in the St. Finbar's Hospital in the 1940s and the 1950s as an orderly, just helping to move patients around. In the 1960s, my own mother, Peg, became the laundry superintendent in St. Finbar's Hospital. And while she was working there as the laundry superintendent, the matron of the hospital at the time was a sister called Sister Augustine. The hospital was run by the Mercy Sisters. So Sister Augustine was the matron in the hospital at that stage in the 1960s. And then in 1972, I went to Kenya, and one of my first appointments was to a big sprawling parish called Eldama Ravine. And the Cork Mercy Sisters had built a hospital in the little town there. And the matron of the hospital was Sister Augustine. And so I got to meet her again in a totally different context. Now, today, of these very important characters, Big Daddy and my mother Peg and Sister Augustine, I want to focus for just a moment on the role that Big Daddy played in my life. My father was the firstborn of 8 kids, and my Uncle Noel is the lastborn. In fact, my Uncle Noel is 2 months younger than me. I was born in October 1946, and he was born in December of 1946. And so for the longest period of time, everybody in the family, aunts and uncles and I, depended for our housing and our food on Big Daddy's salary from St. Finbar's Hospital. And he was paid every Friday. And like clockwork on Friday night, the rent man would come around to the house to kind of claim rent, because we didn't own the house. It was rented out. The entire housing estate was owned by Cork Corporation. And so we got to live in it Monday through Friday, free. And then on Friday, the rent man came and took his rent from Big Daddy's salary. And then on Saturday, my grandmother and Big Mammy would go up to Crowley's shop, which was about maybe 400 yards away from us. And during the week, Crowley's would keep a tab for each family in the housing estate. So you'd get up and you'd buy milk or sugar or bread or whatever, and you'd have no money to pay for it. So every family had their food tab. And then on Saturday, my grandmother would go up and pay off the tab. And so for me, this notion of rent and food are examples of something really, really important in science. It's called retro-causation. It's where future payments are generate present benefits. So Big Daddy's salary on a Friday fed us and housed us Monday through Friday. So the future promised payments actually are generating present benefits. And so I want to talk about that because that's a hugely important idea of trying to understand the notion of time and retro-causation. And so the first point I'll make this morning then, after that introduction, is to talk about actual scientific experiments on retro-causation, because these will be key to the notion of healing the family tree. A friend of mine who's the resident scientist at IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, a guy called Dean Radin, has done some fascinating experiments with retro-causation. And in one of them, for instance, he'll put subjects in a room one by one, and each subject has a computer screen in front of them. And then Dean Radin, in a totally different building, will flash scenes, still images on the screen. And there'll be all kinds of images, babies laughing, kittens playing, and then car crashes and injuries of various kinds. So they're totally random. And at the meantime, the subject is rigged up to galvanic skin responses. These are electrodes that measure the electric conductance of the skin when it has, and it correlates with emotional states. And so these images are flashing on the screen in a totally random order. But what Dean Radin is picking up is that in nanoseconds before the image appears on the screen, the person is responding to the image what they are yet to see. And so you can see immediately on their faces then, if they're looking at a car crash or kittens playing or babies laughing, you can see their faces picking up seconds, nanoseconds at least, before the image actually appeared on the screen. So somehow the image, which is yet to come, is creating an emotional response before it happens. So that's a graphic example. Now, even if it's only nanoseconds, it's still in the future in some way. Now, when I was doing my PhD research, and I created what was at that stage the largest scientific double-blind randomized experiment on the effects of prayer at a distance, on psychological well-being. I was working with two scientists, a guy called William Broad, who was at the school I attended, and a friend of his called Helmut Schmidt, who was a German physicist who had done a whole bunch of similar kinds of paranormal experiences. And so in one series, what he did was he randomly generated 1 million numbers. So a random generator will sort stuff into zeros or ones. It's either on or off. It's like when you toss a coin, it's going to be heads or tails. And so with 1 million tosses, you'd imagine there'd be roughly 500,000, heads and 500,000 tails, or in this instance, 500,000 ones and 500,000 zeros. But having generated all of those data, he did not display them. He kept them in the computer. And then he brought in influencers, people who would try to throw off the randomization process through their intentionality, literally through their intentionality. So they're sitting in front of this computer, there are no data being displayed, and they're trying to influence the outcome. And what he found was astounding, that they could throw out the randomization processes in the numbers as long as the numbers had not been consciously viewed by any living organism. And he tried different organisms, including goldfish. And even if a goldfish was subjected to the actual numbers on screen, the randomization process could not be influenced. But as long as no living kind of consciousness was viewing the data could be changed. And so obviously, it's not that the data were pre-existent and were then changed through the influencers, but that the data weren't actually even being generated until there was a consciousness there, to kind of look at them. So this is a graphic example for me of the notion of retro-causation, future causes resulting in present effects. And that's going to be really, really important as I kind of create my thesis about, praying for our history or for our lineage. So I want to dig into that essay I wrote 2 weeks ago. As I say, I've long been fascinated by the near-death experience and the research that's gone into it. And there have been two groups, the University of Virginia and IANS, the Institute International Association of Near-Death Studies, who have made a science of studying this phenomenon. And as I mentioned, when they go through their research, for me, the single most fascinating aspect of the near-death research is the notion of the life review, where the temporarily dead subject, undergoes some kind of a life review with a guide. And there's absolutely zero judgment attached to this life review. It's just that if I'm the subject and I've had a near-death experience, I get to witness every single event in my life without any judgment from the guide. Now, in this extraordinary wraparound 360-degree, viewpoint. And I get as well to experience it from the inside of every person who was involved in each of the events. So I have an interaction with Johnny, and now I say something rude, or I'm upsetting to Johnny. Now I get to inhabit Johnny's shoes. I walk in his moccasins, and I get to actually experience what it was like for Johnny when I said that to him. But much more importantly, I believe I get to understand the ripple effect, the fact that my actions vis-a-vis Johnny didn't just affect Johnny. Johnny went home and was rude to his wife. And his wife got angry with the kids, and the kids went out and kicked the dog. And so there's this ripple effect that goes out. And I believe, in fact, that every action, has a ripple effect that goes out throughout the entire cosmos, through time and through space. So it becomes really, really important then to live my life mindfully. I believe, in fact, in that every single act on my part or on your part creates a separate timeline. It spins off a parallel reality that involves everything and every being. And when I say every act of mine, I mean even my thoughts and my words, because they carry energy as well. So any form of energy has a ripple effect in the entire cosmos. So history, as we understand it, when you get away from the books that recorded, by the kind of the winners, history is basically the trajectory of a particular timeline, which has been created by the cumulative sum of all the choices made by all the players. So history happens because every single one of us acted in precisely the ways in which we acted, and we created a timeline. Now, I add to this then the notion of pareidolia. According to the psychology, pareidolia, allegedly, is the mistake of inferring meaningful patterns from utterly random data. So, for instance, I look out my window and I see a cloud formation. I say, oh, look at the elephant. And psychology has said, that's a mistake. I'm mistakenly inferring meaningful patterns from utterly random droplets of water in the atmosphere. However, I think pareidolia is a totally different phenomenon. I believe that pareidolia is the ability to call into a level of reality any object through my attention and through my intention. And that's why in the essay I called it's the quantum mechanical double slit experiment writ large. That a photon of light, can't decide whether to be part of a wavelength or to be a particle until it's viewed and experienced by some observer. So I would think that, speaking kind of scientifically, that ultimate reality is basically an infinite matrix of pixels that can be either turned on or turned off, thus creating a kind of a universal scientific language, which is capable of bringing into my senses any image from its potential state to its actualized state. I've used this example before. If I gave you a blackboard with 100 rows of 100 by 100 columns of dots, so now you got 100 times 100, you got 10,000 pixels on your blackboard. And I say to you, can you kind of show me the elephant hidden in this picture? There's an elephant there. It just depends on which dots you connect to which dots, and you bring the elephant out of the matrix. If I gave you a different colored chalk and I said, can you show me the Mercedes-Benz hidden in this picture? By connecting different dots in the matrix, you bring forward the Mercedes-Benz. So what you're doing actually from the ultimate matrix of life, you're just creating a pattern of particular pixels that determine your version of reality. So you're bringing from its potential state to its actualized state, anything that you focus on through your attention and your intention. And in mathematics, we call this Boolean algebra. I did my mathematics degree in the University of UCC, University College Cork, part of the National University of Ireland. I was there from 65 through 68. But the professor of mathematics in University College Cork in the 1840s was George Boole, the guy who created binary mathematics. And so you're actually using, as you're watching this image right now on your screen, you're using Boolean algebra and binary mathematics. There are pixels on your screen, which are either on or off, and is creating the images you're seeing and the voices you're hearing. So then it becomes really, really important to look at this totally different notion of pareidolia. So I want to talk then about I call it an inflationary notion of healing. The current view of our cosmos is that it is an inflationary physical universe, or an expanding universe, that the universe itself is expanding. So we know, for instance, that the Earth is spinning on its axis. If you're on the equator, you're traveling actually at 1,000 miles an hour. But the Earth is also orbiting 365.25 days every year around the sun. And the sun is orbiting in the Milky Way galaxy, and the galaxy are expanding into space. So the cosmos is actually expanding at the rate of 2.6 million miles an hour. That's how fast it's moving away. So that's kind of the inflationary notion of our physical universe. Now, I have a corresponding notion I'm going to call the inflationary theory of the metaphysical universe. And I'm going to deal with it in 4 stages today and next Sunday, God willing. And so this inflationary model for me is a model of healing. So there is first healing my personal history as Sean in this lifetime. And then there's healing the family tree. That's the next level out. And then there's healing Gaia herself, what Judaism would beautifully call Tikkun Olam, the healing of the planet. And then ultimately, there's the healing of the cosmos. So for the rest of the homily today, I'm just going to focus on the notion of your personal healing. And then next Sunday, I'll talk about family healing and Gaia and the cosmos itself. So what do I mean then by healing your personal history? So I want to take a still deeper dive then into the life review using this inflationary model of mine. Imagine that you could ask the guide to tweak the act in question. So you're doing your life review with your guide, and you come across this incident where you said something rude to Johnny. And now, I want you to look at that and ask the guide and say, what if we tweaked my action there? Instead of saying X to Johnny, if I'd said Y to Johnny, or instead of acting rudely, I'd acted lovingly. Can you tell me what the spin-off would have been like? What kind of timeline would that have generated? And what would be the corollary effects on the cosmos and its inhabitants? And you can do that again and again and again, because the cosmos, in some senses, or God or source, is infinite. And no matter how many ways you divide by infinity, every part of it is infinite. If you just take, for instance, the positive integers, 1, 2, 3, etc., etc., etc. No matter what way you divide it up, no matter what chunk you take of it, it could still be infinite if you build in rational numbers, for instance. So is it possible then that you could retweak any of the spun-off timelines? So I had this encounter with Johnny. I'm going through it in my life review, and the guide points out to me, here were the effects of what you said to Johnny on the cosmos. And I say, okay, could we tweak that and have me do something else instead, and then show me what the results would be? And he does that. And then I say, okay, I want to retweak it another way. The results of the first tweaking led to this situation. Now, if I take an event in that and retweak that, what would happen then? And so we can retweak, as far as I'm concerned, again and again and again, and then watch the resulting scenarios. So since I'm out of time, I'm in a timeless reality, there's no time constricting viewing all of the possible tweaks and retweaks of my actions and the results on the cosmos. And then I could look at all these scenarios and I could begin to grade them from the really bad outcomes to the really good outcomes. So now I got a scale and I'm looking at, what happens with these retweaks. And then perhaps I could choose a brand new incarnation and I could parachute into that new lifetime in order to take the better, more life-affirming and more love-promoting action as the result of all the retweaking my guide and I did. And personally, I do not believe in a linear, one incarnation at a time in strict chronological sequence. I foresee rather parallel processing and mutual interactive learning that would result from blending these lifetimes. And so I used in the essay I wrote, imagine that you've made yourself a cup of tea, a cup of lovely hot tea, and you've drunk some of it, and then you went away about your task, and you came back 10 minutes later, and the tea's gone tepid. Now, you could throw the whole thing out and start again, boil the kettle again and get a new tea bag or whatever. But you could do it much more simply. You could just add more boiling water to the tepid tea. So it doesn't involve dumping anything. It involves adding something different so that the entire beverage has a new, much more pleasant taste. Now, in this fashion, I believe it's possible to heal yourself, not by unhappening a previous lineage, but by adding a new one. And then this blend is an improvement that didn't need to pretend that the previous history never happened. You don't have to undo anything you've done in the past, or even undo anything your family lineage has done in the past. You can add a brand new boiling water to the mix and improve the taste enormously. And in life then, you can't dump and start again, because everything you've done and thought and said is contained in the Akashic records. It's part of Grandma God's library of what her kids did. But you can heal the past, and you can grow into the present and the future. Every single thought, every word, every deed can turn the bland, even the foul-tasting past into a pleasant present and a sacred future. Be mindful. Namaste, my brothers and sisters.